Good evening. Right, hang on, wait a minute. I've not used one of these before, so just bear with me a sec. Right, there we go. Perfect. Thank you very much for the intro, Jez. My name is James. I started out in talent acquisition in 2005. 2013, I went internal as an HR manager and a talent manager. I was with Just Giving for 4 years. Richard and I worked together. Shout out, Richard. As well as a martial artist and a killer data scientist, he's also a demon on the dance floor. For those of you that don't know, ask to see some of his steps. I took over in 2017 as the head of people, and I was there until the acquisition with Blackboard, actually until about 9 months after that. And then I left and started consulting. I partnered with Jez and the Eden Smith guys because I was looking for an outfit that were specialists in their sector. And we're working together to unravel some of the mysteries around workforce planning. As Jez said, I'm here to talk about the importance of the why behind what you do and engaging the people power that underpins your architecture. There are three kind of areas that I'm going to touch on, which is the people, their engagement, and their motivation. To start with, let's talk about what is workforce planning. So workforce planning ultimately is the act of aligning your people strategy to your organizational needs. It's about keeping people engaged, utilized, developed, and retained. Now, a lot of people think this sits with HR. This is an HR guy. I would not want to trust the future of my organization to someone who looks like this. Hangdog, pale, beige, depressed, defeated man. That's all right, he's a character. He's not one of my ex-colleagues. He's a character from the American Office. But this guy is kind of representative of what a lot of HR functions are like. Now, I'm not saying all HR functions, and certainly not the more progressive people functions, but ultimately, workforce planning is something that touches on all of us because your success in your role, whether you're an individual contributor or a team manager or a leader or a CDO, will depend on how effectively you engage, develop, retain, and utilize your people. So that's what we're going to give you a little bit of guidance on today, how you can influence workforce planning, how you can unlock the power of your workforce, and, how you can maximize your own potential. Now, why have we been invited to talk here at a series which is ultimately about architecture? Well, there was a 2018 survey conducted by Wishworks, which was 100 data strategists, CDOs, data architects, and it was about workforce planning. 71% of respondents said that the three biggest technology-related challenges in implementing big data, lack of skill set came in at 71%. My question is this: what does lack of skill set actually mean? The easy assumption is that this is a question of headcount, of volume, of filling open roles, of hiring. Now, we all know that hiring is hard. What makes it particularly hard in the world of data is this: it's a lack of alignment. Now, this is a case in point. I was working on site with a client. I went through this exercise. The client wanted to hire a data evangelist. We got a CV of a data champion, but they wanted to be a data whisperer. I didn't know what any of those terms meant. And actually what we found throughout the process was that most of the people who were applying and even interviewing for that role didn't have a clue what any of those terms meant either. So we have recognized that one of the things that people need to do if they're trying to hire is to calibrate with the external market. You have to try and demystify who you're trying to bring through the door to give yourselves a chance. Beyond alignment, why else is it hard to hire people? Well, there is a skills gap in the world of data, and it is growing. According to Burning Glass, between 2011 and 2017, demand for data skills has grown by 4,000%. Pretty impressive, right? If we look at IT Jobs Watch, just for the first 3 months of this year, there are 120 permanent data architect roles being advertised, 218 contract data architect roles being advertised. The fact that contract outstrips permanent tells us one thing: there aren't enough permanent people out there, so companies are trying to find other ways to bring data architects through the door. There is a war for talent, there is a skills shortage, and it's growing. However, I still don't believe that lack of skill set actually means the volume of people you hire. Whether you're undergoing transformation to your data architecture or whether it's just BAU, whether you're a leader or an individual contributor, I believe that skill set or lack of skill set comes down to the same three key areas. Do you have the right people for the way you operate? Do you have people who are appropriately skilled for the job at hand? And do you have people who know why they do what they do? Now, I want to talk firstly about cultural fit. What is culture? What does it actually mean? And why does it factor into the discussion about skill set? Culture is a big buzzword at the moment. It's all over Glassdoor, but I ultimately believe it comes down to three things. It's the behaviors of the individuals and the group within your organization. It's the values against which you measure those behaviors. And it's the environment, the interactions. And that can be anything from the organizational structure, the tools for communication, the meeting cadence, the employee benefits, the physical work environment. This all comes together to form your workplace culture. Now, it is up to managers and leaders and CDOs to communicate cultural expectations. We cannot hold people to a standard if they don't understand what is expected of them from the perspective of their behaviors, their values, and the way they interact with each other. Where I saw this done particularly well, in Just Giving, we had the manifesto on the wall by the kitchen, the most common place where people would congregate. We also had it on the wall of the interview room where all of our candidates came in. So there was no confusion about what was expected of you if you joined Just Giving. We would then replicate those values and behaviors throughout our role profiles, throughout our job specs, and they would then feed into every conversation that we had about performance. It was essential to us that we were measuring people not just against their output, but actually how effectively they were being part of the team. And I think, based on what Richard said so far, we had a culture that empowered people to do things differently, to do things well, to do things in an exciting way. As an individual contributor to a team, you've got to make sure you know what is expected of you, because it's actually us living those values that will encourage others to live them in the same way. We can talk a little bit about what a poor cultural fit looks like. That's the most PC picture I could come up with. There's four nicely dressed multicultural people over here, and then you've got this idiot who looks like he's just stepped out of children's television. In terms of poor cultural fit, I touched on three things. I touched on behavior, I touched on values, and I touched on interactions. I'm going to give you three very quick examples. I knew an architect who, this isn't at Just Giving actually, I should just caveat that. I knew, it wasn't Richard. I knew an architect who was taking significant architectural decisions without communicating to the team what he was doing or why. Now this was a business that prided themselves on open communication, which meant that even though this guy was making the right choice, he was going about it in the wrong way of working, which meant that he was at odds with the culture of the business. It's important to remember it's not just what you do, it's about the value you're adding for other people, and that's whether you're empowering the people above or bringing along behind you the people who are less experienced. The second example about values, I worked with a business who said that customer centricity was the most important thing about their approach to doing business, and yet they had a team of data scientists who were more interested in pursuit of their kind of academic interests than they were in working with the sales team to solve real-life client problems. So even though they're doing some really exciting, interesting stuff, you're not fixing the problem that's there. And if the culture is subscribed to a culture where customer centricity is the most important thing, ultimately, you are falling short of the expectation. The third thing I'm going to touch on is environment and interaction. We had a guy at a company, again, not at Just Giving. He was great. He was a senior guy. He was a subject matter expert. He was a real kind of visionary thinker in his field. But the business purported to be a holacracy. So it meant different people stepping forward at different times to be the expert in the room. And this guy, he really needed the authority that a hierarchy afforded him to be able to get anything done. So what was difficult was you had a team of people who did not want to respond to this guy because he would come in with a draconian hammer approach. And actually, what they were looking for was the opportunity to step up and be part of the discussion. Now, this guy had a reputation. Everyone would say, this guy's an arsehole. He wasn't an arsehole. Well, he was a bit of an arsehole, but ultimately, he was in the wrong room. He was in the wrong company. He was in a culture that was at odds with how he wanted to behave. There are a few quick facts about culture that I want to touch on. The first is that culture requires self-reflection. So I have seen take risks and break things written on many a wall as a cultural aspiration. And yet the second something goes wrong, a founder or a CEO or a CTO or a head of sales wants to blame someone. You are not living the cultural value that you ascribe to if you don't have that self-reflection. Secondly, culture can't be dictated. You can't walk into a room and say, this is the culture we're going to have from now on. What you can do is set out an aspiration. and then people will either come along with you or they won't. Typically, it's top-down. It has to be top-down led, but ultimately, as an individual contributor within a team, we're all actually responsible for being part of driving that culture. The third thing to bear in mind is that culture evolves, whether you are successful or failing, whether you get an injection of cash, you get acquired, whether you're growing or shrinking, it will all impact culture. You cannot expect culture to stay the same. But the good news is this: if you can understand, communicate, and champion your culture, you facilitate performance. And that is step one in tackling lack of skill set. Now, if you ask yourself this question honestly, am I in the right culture for me? And the answer is no. We know from that previous slide, it is now as good a time as any to be looking for a new job, because I guarantee you, you will feel deeply unsatisfied. The second thing I want to come on to is the right person in the right role. So we need to be thinking about whether people are in the right role for them at the right point in their career. And there's a simple health check you can do if you're a team lead or as an individual to assess whether or not you're in the right role for you. Think about utilization. Is the breadth of your skills being used fully? Think about engagement. Is your work challenging, but ultimately with targets and goals that are achievable? What about recognition? Do you feel appreciated, valued, and appropriately rewarded? There is one huge telltale sign that will indicate if someone is in the wrong role for them. They're being a dick. There are some legitimate dicks in the world. These are people who are unfailingly unpleasant, who undermine and delight in making other people's lives a misery, who are racked with insecurity and make it impossible for them to experience joy. You may have had the misfortune to meet one, but thankfully they're few and far between, particularly in the working world. Why is that? It's because the attributes necessary to succeed in the worlds of academia and the professional world do not correlate with the behaviors that a legitimate dick will evidence. Now, I've been 8 years in the world of HR and recruitment, and I've been fortunate enough to only encounter 2 real legitimate dicks. They both worked in HR, so I don't know what that says about my career, but ultimately, what you as colleagues and individuals who are going through this process or team leaders need to think about is the change from not being a dick into becoming a dick. I have seen a lot of this sort of stuff, and it's this gradual transformation that I want to highlight, because if you're responsible for a team, if you're a CDO, a head of, a team lead, be aware of what this transition can mean. Now, we should just caveat by saying there are some external factors which can influence the change of behavior in the workplace. Loss of a loved one, a diagnosis of illness, severe financial considerations. So, you know, it's up to us to make sure we're providing a safe space for our colleagues, and I urge you not to go into work tomorrow, go up to the person with whom you have the least rapport and say to them, how come you're such a dick these days? What I do want you to think about is when you've seen a transition into this behavior gradually, think about what it means. And this could mean yourself as well. If you find yourself being irritable in work, if you find yourself being difficult, if you find yourself not getting on with people, ask yourself, is my skill set being fully utilized? Am I being challenged, but not unrealistically so, that I can still feel a sense of achievement in my role? Do I feel rewarded and recognized? Once you understand how you personally feel, you can take it to a manager. On the flip side, if you're a manager and you're able to ask those questions, this facilitates that kind of conversation. Some people would say this is HR's responsibility. I would say that we're trying to create a collaborative workforce, and therefore we all need to be thinking about these sort of things. If you see someone becoming a dick, you need to get on top of it. What I mean by that is you need to get on top of the situation. Having the right people in the right roles is the second step to addressing lack of skill set. The third step is having people who have the right motivation, what I call the why. Simply put, what is the reason for the role existing in the first place? And when do you think about this? Well, actually, it's constantly. We're setting targets, we're reviewing performance. It's not just when you're backfilling a role or trying to hire a new person. Defining the why is about, for us, has been about supporting clients when they're building out role profiles. So we ask questions like, what problem does this role tackle? How does solving this problem help the team deliver against their targets? How does that support the company in achieving its objectives? How's this role going to impact strategy for the next 3 years? And then we try to translate that into tangible objectives. What does success look like? How will someone know they're doing a good job on a daily, weekly, monthly, or annual basis? For us, it's about capturing hearts and minds, whether for yourself or your team. And to be effective, the why should answer 3 questions. What company goals are we helping to achieve? How is this individual role empowering, elevating, or educating me? And how do we reach the decision to focus on the things that we're focusing on? What's interesting is if you ask those questions, what you'll find is the answers correlate directly with the reasons that are predominantly given for people leaving their jobs. Lack of strategy and direction, lack of opportunity, lack of engagement. So thinking about this stuff actually helps with retention and attrition. Finding the meaning for work has been in philosophy and theory from as far back as, this is Confucius here, up to Martin Luther there. And it remains a real priority for people when they're selecting their next role, probably now more than ever. Lack of meaningful work, cited in the top 5 by Glassdoor for reasons people leave their job. And actually, what you'll find with lack of meaning is that it has a spider effect. People who don't feel they have meaning in their work can become withdrawn, they can become difficult, they can become irritated, demotivated, unhappy, disconnected, all of those behaviors that we're looking to stamp out and try to encourage people out of tie into this. What's really interesting, this guy in the end, this is Evan Williams, who's the co-founder and CEO of Twitter, and he's part of a funding round of $15.5 million for a real-time employee engagement platform. If you look at Culture Amp, that's another one. They did Series D funding at $48 million last year. Employee engagement matters, and it matters to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars of Silicon Valley money. The engagement piece is relatively simple. You've just got to have conversations. If you've got people in your team, ask them how they're getting on. If you're not looking at this stuff from an HR or a company perspective, propose it to them. Say, what are we doing about engagement? Where can we get some tools in? How can we get them some support with this stuff? Because when you define the why, you take the 3rd step in addressing the issue of lack of skill set. One of the biggest inhibitors to success, whether transformation or business as usual, is lack of skill set. But as I've said, lack of skill set isn't just about headcount. It's about having the right people for your culture, it's about having your people in the right roles, and it's about making sure they have the right focus and motivation. These are the things that I think you want to focus on if you want to unpick the people power that underpins the architecture. You can see I get pretty passionate about this stuff, so I don't think we're going to do questions now, but I'll be around. So if you want to come and grab me about any of this sort of stuff and debate it with me, I'm more than happy to do that. We've got some little brochures that talk about how we work with our clients to help them support this sort of stuff as well. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for listening.
Okay.